Hey, welcome to day number 10 of 100 Days of Nautobot. I was actually going to do day number 23, jobs template, because I thought I was going to be expanding actual templates for different view sets, not actually expanding the job tab. And I was quickly reading this, and it's essentially adding this new tab in the job results section that kind of gives it the ability to display like a table of information. In this case, it's like a host name check, and if it passes or fails validation, and then you can update or modify the export button so you can actually export like CSV. I've actually never done this before. I don't, at least right off the top of my head, I don't know where this would be helpful, like for a user or like an audit perspective, because if it all passes, frankly, I don't care. It passed. Um, if it's something fails, I would have to come here, see that it failed, and then click the button and then download the CSV. What I end up actually doing in most of the time is, and this is just like I said, user perspective and user preference really. If your users prefer having tabs and clicking stuff, by all means, this kind of went through what you have to do to create it. But for me, most of the time, the users that I deal with just want to have the file already created. So what I would do here is if everything validates and everything passes, I just wouldn't return a file. Like I wouldn't have a pass. Like it makes no sense. Like it obviously passed and the job would be successful. Right here, complete it, everything passed, and I would have the same results in here, and then at the bottom I'd have everything was successful, right? I could even have an email that says so, but really that would be it. If it failed, I would have if any one of these failed, then I would have a CSV of only the stuff that failed, or I can have both stuff that failed and passed, but the CSV file would be created only if at least one of these failed. I don't see myself ever having to go here, click, and then um, looking at this table and then looking at the data and then exporting the. To me, it's just too many clicks. But every like I said, user preference, and it's something very cool to read. This is day number 23. I've actually never used this or created this just because I've never kind of figured to do this because I just would never kind of come in here to. I don't see a point in it, but maybe I just haven't encountered it yet. But very good kind of read day 23, something kind of cool to kind of get into with expanding templates. But I'm actually going to move to day number 24, which is testing jobs. Um, I usually don't test the Nautobot job as a test job, and I'll kind of go through it, and maybe I'll make more sense. Nautobot uses Django framework, and so it uses Django unit tests to perform anything related to Nautobot, and that's typically how I test things. So I'll give you a little show of how to test a job, but I'll kind of explain the way that I kind of test things. So to test the Nautobot job, I'll just do the hello job with logs, which just takes a debug variable, and all it's doing is just outputting these logging statements, right? So in order to test the Nautobot job based on the documentation here, you have to go into Nautobot apps testing and import the transaction test case, and then run job for testing, and it uses the username test user profile keyword arguments, and this is just the interface just to unit test for jobs. So what you need is you need to get the job class. In this case, would be this hello jobs with logs, and then the module name. So in this case, my custom plugin is called Nautobot tutorial dot jobs dot hello jobs, which is this module right here, and that's how it's able to find the job that I want. Then you finally run this run job with testing. You pass the job, and then in my case, I'm adding the actual variable that I have here in order for me to test this debug type log, or else this wouldn't show. So if you have multiple variables here, some that might be required, some that may not be. You would pass it in here so that the job actually, runs the way that you want and tests the way that you need it to. Finally, like you can do whatever you want with the job itself, but for this case, we're just getting the job log entry, getting the job results. I get the logs, and then I filter through and I say, assert that these logs are actually being printed. So this is just a simple way to test your job. The way that you test it is using the invoke unit test. So if I use invoke unit test and I put the H, you'll see the commands that you can do here, the options. Typically for me, when I'm testing locally or developing locally, I always use a keep database. Most of my jobs that I create, I use a get or create type of method, and so that it saves time essentially. It's just faster retesting. If you don't put this, it will try to create the database, and it can take a bit depending on how complex your environment is. Verbose, um, this verbose here, I actually overwrite this, and I always have verbose level 2 or 3, I believe, all the time, just because I like to see um, the actual results of each individual test and not just like the dots. And that's just the preference. This is new. I actually haven't seen this one. In my local environment, I actually don't test the um, building of the documentation, but this is just something that it, it's built in here, so it just runs it. And then it also has coverage as well. I don't have that either. But in our case, we're going to use um, the invoke unit test K, SK, V, and then P, which is I'm just going to be calling this particular uh, testing case. So if I run that, it says, I found one test, it does its, migrations and all that stuff. And then finally it does a test on here. So um, test run, okay, everything well works as expected. If you do not, in my case, um, remove the building docs, sometimes, depending on your environment, you will run into this, running in strict mode because you're missing some type of um, file in your in your directory if you're kind of messing around with documentation. So just an FYI. So that's kind of how you test a job. I'll be honest, I rarely test jobs like this, especially you can, but the way that I kind of test stuff in most of my jobs don't run necessarily like this. I usually extract or abstract most of the information within here. So I might have like, a different, I might have a job, and then I might have helpers, and then I might have utilities and everything outside of things. That way I can plug and play a bunch of stuff into jobs and not repeat code. So most of the time, functions and classes or like a mix in that I have here, I will have an actual test testing each individual thing outside of the job itself. I rarely write tests like this because I most of the time test individually, like the mixins and functions and classes outside of the job itself. Um, that's just the way that I've always written tests. I'm not saying there's a good way or bad way, but if you wanted to know how you write a job, a test directly for a job, this is what you would do. But it really depends on the standards that you're kind of going with. I prefer writing tests that abstract the job itself and test individual things. That way I don't have to, rely on testing this job and then having to test this job. If all these things share common things, I'm okay at that aspect of things. So this is just a very quick demo on testing jobs. It's day number 24. It's very simple, but it can be very complex. I've seen some of these that get really in depth, but like I said, it really depends on your testing philosophy that you have going on. So that's the end of this video. Hope you enjoyed it.